I was in psychi many centuries ago when I was an undergraduate student, so it's been around a long time, a venerable institution of honors in psychology. Janelle was in psychi. Were you in psychi? Mike was not in psychi. He was, why not? Oh, he wasn't a psychology major. Oh, he wishes he was. Yeah. And here's another thing here that I posted this on VSpace, but there is an undergraduate journal here. So if you want to publish any of the research, many of you are working in research labs. Alicia is working with me. If you're doing an honors thesis or independent project or something, even if it's not independent, but you want to get some publishing experience, you can try to publish your research in this undergraduate psychology journal. This slide's posted on VSpace, I think, in announcements. All right, a quote for the day to get us started in our discussion of diagnosis. Always remember you're unique, just like everyone else. That actually does have something to do with what we're going to be talking about today. One of the criticisms leveled against diagnosis and classification is that it misses the uniqueness of the individual. So we're going to talk about diagnosis today, and Thursday we'll talk about assessment. But diagnosis, classification, determining whether or not somebody meets diagnostic criteria for a particular disorder, whether it's ADHD or social anxiety or substance-related disorders, whatever the diagnosis, we're going to consider that today. Not all the diagnoses, but just the fundamental concept of diagnosis and classification. And a good place to begin is with a dictionary definition of what is diagnosis. And it's the act or method of distributing into groups, classes, or families. So classifying things is not unique to psychology. A diagnostic system is the clinical psychology world's way of classifying things, but it's certainly done in geology and chemistry and literature and the arts. Almost every discipline has a way of classifying things. It's kind of within our human nature. In fact, there's a whole line of research in psychology on concepts and categories and why human beings are so drawn to the idea and the practice of classifying things, of organizing things into groups based on their similarities. And so that's certainly what we're talking about in diagnostic classification, the act or method of distributing into groups, classes, or families based on some set of similar characteristics. Now, where it gets dicey or controversial is that we're classifying in psychology, in our field, in clinical psychology, based on human behavior. And that makes people uneasy for a number of reasons. Like, well, how do you know that somebody's behavior is abnormal and should be part of a diagnostic category of a mental disorder? Maybe they're just a little bit eccentric or weird. How do you know what should be considered abnormal behavior and therefore one of our diagnostic categories and not? This is human behavior after all. And plus, everybody is an individual, and so everybody is unique, just like everyone else. So how can you possibly capture all the uniqueness of the human experience and behavior into a silly diagnostic system of mental disorders? But yet that's the task that our field faces. So in America anyway, the diagnostic system that we use is called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. And this is just a slide showing the history of the different revisions of the diagnostic system. For those of you that were paying attention over the past few years in the news, you'll know that a new edition of the diagnostic system was just released. And even if you weren't paying attention, you know by being in this class when I asked you to get the textbook version that says DSM-5 update on it, that DSM-5 just came out. In fact, it was just released in May of 2013, just a few short months ago. And so that's why I wanted you to get that version of the textbook. And let me just say one thing actually about the textbook. I think I emailed this or I put an announcement on VSpace, but there are copies of the textbook now in the Education Psychology Library. There's 4 of them in there. So you can check them out for 2 hours at a time in the library. You can't take them out of there unless you happen to check it out 2 hours before closing time and then you get it overnight. I learned something informative about the library. Now they've set it up so that if you check out the book there, they'll let you scan page after page after page for free. So that's almost like getting a whole book for free. In fact, it is like getting a whole book for free if you take the time to scan the entire book. So they must have a scanner there. You just have to bring a flash drive, plug it in, and you can scan away all these loose binder-ready pages of the book. Back to the DSM-5. It was just released in May of 2013, but it wasn't the first one. The first Diagnostic and Statistical Manual was released in 1952. It wasn't called DSM-1, it was just called DSM. And every disorder then was really not called a disorder at all. It was called reactions. This was not long after the end of World War II, where lots of folks were coming back from the war, and they were having all sorts of symptoms, and so people thought, well, this was a reaction to war, reaction to some sort of brain injury, reaction to this, that, or the other. So all the categories, and there weren't that many of them, you can see from the table here, 106, were called reactions. Then some 16 years later, 1968, the second edition of DSM was released, so this was now then called DSM-2. Here, there was a big distinction between neuroses, and that's still a term that we use today. If you're taking personality with Professor John, you'll learn about neuroticism. That's one of the big 5 factors of personality. You may use that term pejoratively. Neurotic usually means anxiety. You're so anxious. You're so uptight. And neuroses factored largely into the DSM-2 and were distinguished from the psychoses, where people really had a separation from reality. That would be something like schizophrenia or, in some cases, bipolar disorder. Then some 12 years later, there was a giant major revision in DSM-3. It was completely different than the prior 2 editions. There were lots of different things that were going on in the DSM-3. The descriptors, the diagnostic criteria were rewritten substantially, and I'll illustrate that here in a moment. It was the introduction of the multi-axial system. So in DSM-3, up until just last May of 2013, there were 5 different axes that diagnoses were made on. DSM-5 got rid of that system. So for 33 years, since the DSM-3 was published in 1980, that multi-axial system was a central part of our diagnostic system. Now it's gone. You can see there were some other revisions throughout time here. DSM-3R came pretty quickly. It was largely to correct some of the things that were wrong in DSM-3. You can also look at that table here and see as time marches on with these different revisions, so do the number of diagnostic categories. Now, why do the number of diagnostic categories increase over time? Is it because we, as a science, have become better at detecting and developing diagnostic criteria for different disorders, and so therefore they merit inclusion in a diagnostic system? Is it because instead we as a society have made a decision and as a field that lots of different behaviors that before weren't considered disorder, we now ought to consider them disorder, and so we can consider them a disorder by putting them into our diagnostic system. So are we over-labeling different kinds of behavior now as pathological behavior, disordered behavior, and that accounts for our increase in numbers? Well, the answer is yes, really, to both of those. I think we've learned a lot more about things. So, for example, autism, it wasn't in the diagnostic system until 1980. Few people would disagree that autism doesn't belong in a diagnostic system for mental disorder, although there's controversy associated with the revisions that were made in DSM-5 that we'll talk about. But it wasn't even a part of the diagnostic category system until 1980. It was that we learned a lot more about it. We developed a reliable and valid set of diagnostic criteria that warranted its inclusion into a diagnostic system. But with respect to the overdoing it and overpathologizing, as we'll talk about here in a few weeks when we hit anxiety disorders, there's a category that's somewhat controversial called acute stress disorder. And what that refers to is having many of the similar symptoms of PTSD, but within a very short time window following exposure to some sort of a traumatic event. And so many people question whether or not that's an actual diagnostic category. Is it really a disorder, or is that a typical reaction to a horrific traumatic experience? Another change that happened in May of 2013 with the release of DSM-5 when we talk about mood disorders in a few weeks, the diagnostic category of depression used to have, as part of the diagnostic criteria, a kind of exclusion criteria for bereavement to separate somebody who may be having an episode of depression from somebody who may just be grieving the loss of a loved one, for example. In DSM-5, they removed that bereavement criteria. And so the thought now, in the worry, I guess I should say, and time will tell, is that people then who may have what looks like an episode of depression, they're feeling sad all the time, they don't have a lot of energy, their sleep is not very good, they've lost their appetite, but this is after their loved one has just died. Are we pathologizing a typical grief reaction now by removing that bereavement exclusion criteria from depression? So the number of categories has increased throughout time, partly based on science and for good reason, partly, I'm afraid, due to the over-pathologizing of different kinds of behavior. So let's just take a quick peek. I've just used obsessive-compulsive, what we now call obsessive-compulsive disorder, or OCD, as an example. And you don't have to write all this down. You couldn't. It's posted in the slide. But just to kind of illustrate how the criteria have changed over time. So back in 1952, it was called obsessive-compulsive reaction. You can see it's just a real short paragraph here describing. And that's all a clinician would have to use. If they had somebody coming into their office, how do I know if this person has obsessive-compulsive reaction? All they had to refer to was just these few short sentences here. And then if we go ahead to DSM-2, here's what the now called obsessive-compulsive neurosis refers to. So again, maybe a little bit longer, a couple of extra sentences perhaps here, but this is all that a diagnostician had to go on, just reading through these sentences and deciding if that short description captured what the person coming to the office was displaying. And then if I'm going to jump way ahead in time here, because there wasn't that much change between DSM-3 and DSM-4-TR, which came out in 2000. Here, it looks a lot different than those short paragraphs. First of all, obsessions and compulsions are distinguished. So there are diagnostic criteria for what are obsessions, and then there are diagnostic criteria for what are compulsions. Also, you can see they're numbered. It's not just a long paragraph. And beginning with DSM-3 in 1980, the emphasis was shifted to these not very, but somewhat shorter descriptions. The diagnostic criteria now are written as observable behavioral markers as a way to aid in a diagnostician's reliability, so that if two different clinicians read this, they can both understand what is meant by the person, recognizes that the obsessions are the product of his or her own mind. So they're more behaviorally descriptive than in the prior versions. Here's what the criteria for compulsions are in the DSM-4-TR, which is not that different from what they were really in DSM-3. So still kind of paragraph-like, but an emphasis on the overt behaviors. What does a compulsive behavior look like? Not about a compulsive neurosis or a reaction, but what's the actual behavior that's associated with a symptom of compulsion. And then in DSM-5, here's what it looks like. That just came out in May. What is in red here, these are the changes that were made to this particular category. Not very many, really, just a minor tinkering around with the words here in red compared to DSM-4-TR. There are only two numbers here now. The other numbers in the prior versions were moved to a different section of the diagnostic category. And then there weren't any changes at all in the diagnostic criteria for compulsions. So here's an example of a category in DSM-5 that didn't change that much. Now, there are other categories, as we'll see throughout the course of the semester, that changed a good bit, that were significantly altered. There are some categories that were removed. Of course, new categories were added. So as I mentioned, the multi-axial system. So for 33 years in our field, if we had somebody coming to us where we were trying to make a diagnosis, we did it on 5 different axes. We considered whether or not they had a primary mental disorder. Then we would assess whether or not they had a personality disorder. Then we would assess whether or not they had any kind of medical condition to go along with that. Then we would take a look at how they just are functioning in general in their life, what's their psychosocial functioning is called. That would be axis 4. And then axis 5 is just an overall global assessment of functioning. This was done using a 100-point scale where 100 is functioning perfectly. You couldn't be better in the world, and a 0 is I can't believe you're alive, you're just not functioning at all. So we would make these diagnoses based on these 5 axes. Well, beginning in May, that's gone, right? We don't do that anymore. And this is a major shift in the field for people making diagnoses. So what's happened now is everything that used to be on the first 3 axes in DSM-4 has been compressed into a first axis, which is just dealing with any psychiatric and medical diagnoses. So if you meet criteria for an episode of major depression and borderline personality disorder, and you have type 2 diabetes, we as clinicians, researchers, are all supposed to still consider that, but rather than separating them out on these 3 different axes, they're all going to get put together on one. Now, you might say, well, who cares? A list of 3 things vertically or all together, what's the big difference? Well, that's part of the rationale for why this was done in DSM-5. Clinicians, researchers are still supposed to assess more and pay attention to these things, but separating them out gave an impression, perhaps a false one, that these things were separate from one another and not at all related. Whereas we know, for example, that depression and borderline personality disorder are highly comorbid. Comorbid is the jargony term that we use in our field to say that 2 things often go together, or they're diagnosed together. So people who have borderline personality disorder also often have episodes of depression. They're comorbid, they co-occur, they happen together. There was no rationale, or so the framers of DSM-5 thought, for separating out medical things on the 3rd axis. So let's just put them all together because they're all interrelated. They do go together, and separating them out just doesn't make any sense. So the worry will be now that some clinicians or researchers, because they don't have those separate 3 axes, they won't pay any attention to some of these other things. They'll neglect them. Again, time will see how this new revision happens. So now there's also a kind of an axis, if you will, or clinicians are supposed to still take into consideration psychosocial and contextual factors. So somebody's coming to see you when they have an episode of depression, it's important to know, for example, if they've just lost their job and their mortgage is overwhelming, their house is underwater. So not only do they not have income to pay their mortgage, what they owe on their mortgage is well more than what their house is worth, so they couldn't even sell it to get out from under that debt. So that might be a stressful event, wouldn't you agree, that might precipitate an episode of depression. So it's important to know that compared to somebody else who might come into your office who has met the criteria for an episode of depression, but things seem to be going really well in their life. They have a wonderful partner, they have a great job, their dream job, in fact. They can't believe that they've landed in this dream job, they're living comfortably, things couldn't be better, but yet they find themselves in a deep, dark episode of depression. So it's important still, and we'll see, hopefully clinicians, researchers will still consider these contextual and psychosocial factors. And then these last axis here in the current DSM-5 is not really using this 100-point scale, the global assessment of functioning scale, as it did in prior versions. Instead now, consistent with other worldwide diagnostic systems, in particular, there's something called the International Classification of Disease, or ICD, that the World Health Organization puts together. They use a different scale for assessing overall functioning, a disability scale, and that's now what people using the DSM-5 are asked to do, to be consistent with practices around the world. The ICD is in its 10th edition. Right now it's undergoing a revision. The 11th edition will be released if their timing stays on track in a couple of years. So this is a major shift. We'll see how it plays out. Now let's pause for a second and take a look at some 5 characteristics that make for a good diagnostic system, and then we can evaluate whether DSM-5 might meet these criteria. So in order for a diagnostic system to be useful, it ought to have clear descriptions. And so in some ways, the efforts in the revision of DSM-5 were intended, so when I showed you that in red for obsessive compulsive disorder, those minor tinkering of words, most of those, that wordsmithing was done in the service of increasing clarity. So in some cases, the DSM-5 does a good job in clear descriptions. In others, it doesn't do such a great job. A second criteria for any diagnostic system, whether it's DSM-5 or ICD-11, is that these categories should be reliable and valid. And if you have read chapter 3 in the book, you can see that we go through a mind-numbing number of types of reliability and validity. It just makes you want to your head explode. But all of these things are important, and particularly important for diagnostic systems is inter-rater reliability. And what this means is basically, in a real-world context, if you go to my office and tell me about your symptoms, and I give you a diagnosis of social anxiety disorder, but then you go and see Janelle and describe your symptoms to Janelle, and she gives you a diagnosis of depression, we're not agreeing very well. And it could be because Janelle and I are incompetent, but more likely it's because our diagnostic system is not very good, and that we're following these criteria, but yet we don't agree because of our diagnostic system. The criteria may be identical, for example, which leads Janelle to think depression, me to think social anxiety disorder. So it's important that reliability be very good, and there's worry about some of the changes in DSM-5 about the reliability, that some of the reliability may actually decrease based on some of the changes. It may be harder, which doesn't sound like much progress, does it, for two different professionals to agree with some of the changes that were made in DSM. And then validity. So you can't even get to the question of validity before you've established reliability. So this is a kind of a tried and true principle of research methods. It applies to diagnostic systems, but if you don't have a measure that's reliable, you can't even begin to assess whether or not it's going to be valid. So let's say for a moment, though, and it's not, I'm making it up, some categories in the DSM-5 are actually very reliable, but are they valid? Now, what does validity mean? Well, there's all sorts of different kinds of validity. There's content validity, there's space validity, there's criterion validity, there's construct validity. Are you kidding me? With all these kinds of validity. Overarching, what validity means is your construct, does your category measure what it should be measuring? So if I have a diagnostic category of schizophrenia, is it really capturing what our current knowledge says is schizophrenia? Is it adequately capturing that or not? And they're the different kinds of validity are different for different sorts of functions. A diagnostic system ought to be complete. So it ought to be able to, if we have a diagnostic system of mental disorders, it ought to be comprehensive and capture all of what we consider to be a mental disorder. And I think the DSM-5 does a good job of that. In fact, it probably goes overboard in many ways. It's probably over-inclusive. Some things are in there that shouldn't be a diagnostic category. A diagnostic system, all things equal, this is the principle of science, it ought to be simple, not like simple-minded or super easy or like 144 characters Twitter diagnosis simple. But simple in the parsimonious, in that you can describe and come up with good descriptors of the diagnostic categories in as simple and straightforward a way as possible. If you do that, you're going to increase the reliability. So if you can avoid having a long paragraph of things like we had in DSM-2, it's more simple and straightforward if you can list in descriptive and clear terms in the simplest way as possible the diagnostic criteria. And then a good diagnostic system ought to have exclusive categories. So if I meet the diagnostic criteria for avoidant personality disorder, should I also meet the criteria for social anxiety? Probably not. Otherwise, why would you have two different categories if everybody meets the criteria for both of those? This is an overlap problem, it's sometimes called, where people meet diagnostic criteria for more than one disorder. Now, how do you distinguish overlap that's due to faulty diagnostic criteria from actual comorbidity, where that's just the way things happen, things tend to occur? This exclusive category issue is particularly problematic in the personality disorder section. There are 10 different personality disorders, even though you only have one personality, there's still 10 different categories. And people tend to have, actually most people diagnosed with one personality disorder are going to be diagnosed with more than one. There was a huge discussion and a lot of effort put forth in the revision of DSM-5 to shift the whole section on personality disorders from these 10 distinct categories, which aren't all that distinct and inclusive anyway, into a category that focuses on dimensions. Now, what are dimensions? Well, for those of you again taking 150 with Professor John, you will soon learn about ocean, the 5 factors of personality. That's an example of dimensions of personality. What ultimately happened at the end of the day was that the DSM-5 kind of chickened out. They really didn't go forward with the dimensional system, and they stuck with these 10 categories. And the fascinating sociology of science question as to why DSM-5 didn't move forward with the dimensional system in personality disorders. They had all the evidence that they needed in favor of this. People generated really comprehensive dimensional approaches to personality disorders that were then really discarded. They're in the appendix, or they're somewhere else in the book, but they were really, the DSM-5 committee ultimately didn't accept those recommendations, and they kept the 10 categories. Yeah. Are you talking about DSM-5? Yeah. She's asking me, do I personally like DSM-5 better than past editions? And I don't have enough personal experience with it yet to give you a good answer about that. So unfortunately, because it just came out, I'm just starting to wrap my head around what these changes are myself. So I don't have enough experience with it. In the realm that I use it in the most is in schizophrenia, because that's where most of my research is. And the changes there were actually, I think, for the better. But we haven't really used it that much because it was just rolled out. So there are lots of things that I can criticize about it, and there are some things that I can praise about it. That's true of prior diagnostic systems, and I don't know enough yet about it myself to know if the balance of praise and criticism is different than prior editions. Somebody else have it? Yeah. A new category as opposed to... So what I think he's asking, what's the process by which people would decide whether or not we should just have, you're not really saying this, but one anxiety disorder, like a broad category, with say like a lot of different subtypes, or separate anxiety disorders, like we have panic disorder and specific phobia and social anxiety disorder. So who decides? How does that get decided? Well, it's a good question, and let me just punt on it a little bit, just to say, if you look at the APA